Hi, and welcome back to the Shane Plays Out of the Abyss Notes series, where I talk about DMing my party of intrepid players at my friendly local game store through Out of the Abyss, which is the 5th edition Underdark adventure. If you're new to this series, this is not an actual play. This is not a blow-by-blow of everything that happened in every roll. This is a summary of running my most recent session with my players on how to run Out of the Abyss, and then I also talk about sort of DM thoughts and rules clarifications and sort of that thing with D&D 5th edition, and kind of some stuff can be applied to RPGs in general. So if you're a returning viewer, thanks so much. I appreciate you. And we'll move right on. So first of all, a couple of quick notes. This video covers 2 sessions. I had a session where we wrapped up the troglodyte layer that I just didn't feel there was enough content there to justify its own video. So there's that. And then 2, I recorded earlier. So I want to apologize. See the light here? That's kind of, the lighting is not ideal. I recorded earlier when the sun wasn't hitting my window back there. And I did a real, it was like an hour and a half worth of video, really going into a lot of stuff. And for some reason, none of my sound recorded. So I'm recording this again. I almost said forget it, because this is New Year's Day, and I didn't want to spend my entire New Year's Day recording and recording and recording, but I did want to get a video out, and I've got another session tomorrow. So I didn't want to just, say forget it. And I know people like these videos and they're helpful to them, so I'm going to go ahead and re-record. But what I'm going to do, because the other video had probably close to 30 minutes of viewer feedback in it, because there were some good questions after video 62 that I wanted to address. I just don't have the heart to do all that again. I just, I'm spending most of the day recording, and then I'm going to have to edit, and I still want to spend some time with my family on New Year's Day. So anyway, I'm going to address one question from viewer feedback that specifically goes into some Out of the Abyss related stuff I think is important to clarify. But other than that, I'm not going to go through all the viewer feedback, even though I think there were a lot of good questions and I enjoyed answering everything the first time around. I just don't have the heart in me to go through that again, same day. So having said all that, let's press on. I hope everyone's having a nice 2018. This is New Year's Day. I had a very nice New Year's Eve with my wife and son. We took it easy. Last week for Christmas, we Christmased multiple days in a row. And so this weekend we just took it easy, and it was absolutely fine. Watched Signs with my wife, which is one of my favorite movies. It's about aliens or whatever, but it's really one of the most powerful movies about faith ever made. So I love Signs. But anyway, moving on. I did want to say it is 2018. It's New Year's Day. So let's take a moment. Let's pause and reflect on 2017, and let's think about 2018 and what we might want to do in D&D and our personal lives. All right, so that's enough pondering about 2017 and 2018, and let's press right on. Like I said, we'll do one viewer feedback question because I think it's important to go over this, and then we'll get right into the most recent session. We're picking up after the troglodyte layer from the last session. They were in the middle of the troglodyte layer and had just fought the ropers, so that's where we'll be picking up in this video. So first of all, Anders Rolig, and like I said, there's a lot of other people that wrote in. I enjoyed your questions. I'm sorry that I'm not getting to them in this video. But Anders Rolig wrote in and said, hello, good to listen to you again. I feel I fell out like 10 episodes back. Since my party had a big break, I listened to most of White Plume Mountain, and it inspired me to do White Plume Mountain for one of his 2-play groups. Cool. I'm really thankful as always for your notes on both campaigns. So again, that's one of the reasons why I do this. This video series, I've mentioned before, for the amount of viewers versus the amount of time that I put into these videos, it's kind of a low ratio. For the amount, like I said, for every 30 minutes of video edited and put up, the viewer return is kind of low, but I get really good comments and feedback on these videos. So I know they're helpful to people, which is why I keep doing them. So if you can, just, make sure to leave comments and thumbs up on my videos. That helps out a lot. And I had a couple of other comments in this past videos, viewer feedback, where people were like, thank you for these videos. I had a viewer that watched all 62 in 1 month. I had another person who said, you must keep going with these videos with exclamation points. So that kind of feedback is it's very important to me. And that kind of thing is why I'm re-recording today. Instead of just saying, forget it. Well, I'm not going to do videos on that part of Out of the Abyss. Okay, so he said, as of now, okay, so Anders, and you can go to video 62 and read his full comment. It's a fairly long one, but he's another person, and we had two or three people in viewer feedback for this video. I'll mention that the troglodyte encounter can either be adjusted or avoided entirely, or maybe moved to earlier in the adventure. The general consensus is that the troglodyte encounter, as written in the point of the adventure that it's in, is kind of, pointless. This is my Star Wars cup I got from my buddy for Christmas, and I guess it's cooled down enough that you can't see it now, but when the liquid's hot enough, the lightsabers will ignite. I've got a whole video in my go look. There's a video I did just on this mug. I like it a lot. It's a lot of fun. My wife also got me a Captain Phasma coffee mug, which it's just like Captain Phasma's helmet. But anyway, I digress. So he says, I feel like the troglodyte encounter should have come in chapter 3 together with the Silken Path, Dawnbringer quest, Gabagool quest, and Hooked Horror Knoll thing. The troglodyte encounter could just be scaled to fit for level 4 characters. But he said he might run the troglodytes just for story. And I'll really feel some kind of mind flayer madness chapter could have been added at this point. That would be interesting. Something like that. Now, I personally, a couple of sessions back, just kind of threw in a random mad mind flayer for an encounter to have fun with it. But anyway, but that's not the main thing that Anders is writing in about. He's talking about power creeps. Now, I think that what he's referring to is power creep in the sense of like scope creep in a project or whatever. It like over time the players are getting more and more powerful, and it's like a creeping kind of slow incline. Now maybe he means power creeps like a nickname or a label, like it's just a power creep, like somebody who's like a min-maxer or something. Maybe, I don't know. I'm going to address it with just that slowly creeping up power level. That's kind of built into D&D. But here is his basic explanation. And he says, I have a PC that runs haste spell plus spell gems from Blending Stone to cast 2 spells per round, 1 from the spell. This makes the party very powerful, as the haste is twinned, and thus lets the paladin smite things to hell. Which, that's what a paladin pretty much wants to do, or, most paladins do. The last PCs, or the other PCs he's having trouble with, are a cleric that heals everything or pulls out spirit guardians as AoE, and a rogue that joins about 50% of the sessions. Okay, so let me stop right there. So when I mentioned the spell gems and haste, I know a couple of you out there already were like, whoa! Yep, I'll get to that. Okay, so we're probably immediately going, hey, wait a minute, let's take a deeper look at that. I will address that here in a moment. First, let me address the cleric that heals everything, or pulls out spirit guardians as AoE, and the rogue that is only coming to about 50% of the sessions. And then we'll deal with the spell gems and the haste and 2 spells per round and that sort of thing. So, because spell gems are very specifically Out of the Abyss, they're introduced in Out of the Abyss, so this is why I'm doing this viewer comment again. So first of all, the power creep in D&D or most role-playing games is just part of it. If that's what you're talking about, just it's they're getting more and more powerful, and it's harder to challenge them. A cleric that heals everything, and I'm not being sarcastic here. I think that these are good questions and stuff. I just don't. I mean, that's what a cleric is going to do. Your traditional cleric, or anyway, they're going to heal everything. That's they're going to keep everybody up as much as possible. I can't tell you how many times Um, I've had a good challenge for a party, and a couple players went down, or player characters, and I'm like, oh, okay, so now they're going to feel more challenged, and the cleric just got them back up. That's kind of what a cleric does. Um, so what you can do with that kind of thing is you can prolong the encounters with more enemies, or make the enemies tougher. So the cleric's eventually going to run out of healing spells, and if the bad guys are still up, and the cleric's out of healing spells, ruh-roh raggy, right? So that's one way to look at it. Now, Spirit Guardians is AoE. I mean, that's one of the spells. You could do that. So hopefully my cats are not about to have a big fight. Been a lot of problems with cats today in the previous video, and now this one, they're being a little bit crazy back there. So that's just part of the game, and learning how to adjust difficulty encounter to challenge your players. Now the rogue that's only showing up about 50% of the sessions, unless that was a close friend, or there would be some sort of real problem with asking them to either come more often or not come at all, that's what I would do. I would say, look, 50% is really not a good percentage of sessions to attend. This is a group activity. When you're not here, it changes things. And maybe your character has the knowledge or the weapon or whatever that's needed, or its tactics change when you're not here because you're not sneak attack, all this stuff. I think 50% is the bare minimum of participation for a D&D group, and I would actually probably want more. I had a player in my campaign recently that was getting to where they were missing fairly often, much more than anybody else, and I finally had to address it, because usually when I would say, where's so and so, it wouldn't be like, oh, he couldn't get out of work, or oh, it was just like, oh, he decided to work on his house tonight. So right, so you're choosing not to come, which affects the game. So I finally said, both privately and in the group, that you got to make, I think I said 75%. You got to make 75%, or I'm going to ask you to drop out. And the reason is because I played a store. So, there's people all the time saying, hey, do you have any D&D groups going? Do you have any open spots? And a lot of our D&D games up at the store are full. So I'm like, nope, sorry, I'm full, and they're full, and they're full. And so when you're turning people away, but then you have players that are not showing up all the time, I feel less and less good about turning people away. So I clarified that recently, that you're expected to participate if you're in the game. It's not just, oh, I'll go when I feel like it. If I get the sense you're just showing up when you feel like it, I will ask you to leave. So it really comes down to, who is this person that's playing the rogue? Why aren't they coming? Did you know before they were going to play that they could only come 50% of the time? There's a lot there. But if they're just only showing up half the time, and there's not really a good reason, it's just because they only show up when they feel like it, I would, and I always think it's, try to talk to stuff privately, try to talk to people privately. And if things don't change, then, state the expectation with the whole group hearing, not just singling that player out, but just show, hey, by the way, here's the expectation. That way everybody knows. And then if the behavior still doesn't change, then just ask them to leave. Say, sorry, I don't think you have time for the game. And I'm turning people away. And even if you're playing at your home with friends, you're not turning people away. There's still a certain expectation. We've made room for you here, and all these other people show up, but you're not. So, why are you wanting to play? Because you're not coming all the time. But then again, there's always going to be, there's other, if they work it out with a DM ahead of time, or if there's special circumstances, or if they're like your best friend or your brother, or, there's other stuff that comes into the mix. And if the rest of the party doesn't care, and it's not really affecting anything, like, it's, then who cares? It's just really up to each individual group and dynamic. But where I play, um, I'm gonna have a minimum participation. Running up the store, turning people away. I'm already running a larger group than I want to, kind of thing. So there you go. But always, and that same principle can be applied to all kinds of problems at the table. If people are, we had another viewer comment, was asking about somebody making inappropriate jokes that was lowering everybody's enjoyment of the game. Talk to them privately. If they still don't change the behavior, state to the whole table without singling them out. Just say, hey, by the way, here's the expectation on behavior. And then if they still don't change, ask them to leave. That way they've been talked to privately. Then the entire group's been made aware of what the expectation is. And they've been given a couple of chances, and then they leave. And then also that way the group isn't like, where's so-and-so? I mean, because it's obvious why they're not there. You said probably a couple of weeks ago or whatever, here's the expectation. And then it was obvious they didn't meet that expectation. So there's no surprises on anybody. Now they're probably going to, badmouth you or be upset at you or whatever. Human nature is human nature, even if they clearly caused the problem and they were given chances, but they blew it. Then, they're going to, oh, that person's terrible. He's the worst GM or DM ever, blah, blah, blah. Totally unfair. Whatever. You can't, you have to do it. Like, I know that I did. I treated it respectfully and gave them chances. And the standard was clearly communicated. Not everybody's going to like it. You just got to move on. So, especially if you're playing among a group that is not friends outside the game. These are all, and that's my group. Everyone's friendly, and I think a few people maybe out of the game a little bit communicate, but for the most part, they come for the game, they get together for the game, and then they go their separate ways. So, it's even easier to just say, here's the standard, that's because it's all voluntary. Now, like I said, if it's really close friends, then it gets stickier and you're just going to have to handle that, the best you can. So, all right. The main thing I want to talk about in this viewer comment is this soul gem thing. Or not the soul gem, the spell gem. Now there's a magic item in Out of the Abyss that's introduced in Out of the Abyss, as far as I know. Maybe it's only introduced for 5th edition, but it's definitely introduced in Out of the Abyss. See if I can find it here. And it's called a spell gem. You can get them on Blending Stone, and they allow you to cast a spell into. It's on page 223. And each spell gem has like a maximum level for the spell it can store, etc., etc. And once a day before the next dawn, you can cast a spell into it, and it will store that spell. And then you can turn around and cast it. If you can normally cast that spell, if your player character could normally cast that spell, then they can cast the spell out of the spell gem as an action. So it's kind of like a scroll or, a wand or something like that can cast a spell. But you can put the spell into it, and you expend a spell slot and everything else, and you just put it in there. I guess you could do it like a ritual. If a spell allows to be cast as a ritual, you could do the ritual and put it into the spell gem. And then you can use it to, I want to cast a spell. So I've got magic missile stored in here. So for whatever reason, maybe I'm out of spell slots. Maybe I didn't memorize magic missile. I don't know. For whatever reason, I want to cast it out of the spell gem instead of throwing it out as a regular spell. And so you just use an action and you cast it out of the spell gem. And there's a table on 223 that lists, the types of gems and the maximum spell level and the save DC and attack bonus and all this stuff for these spell gems. Now, let's go back to what Anders said. Anders said, I have a PC that runs haste spell plus spell gems from Blending Stone to cast 2 spells per round, one from the spell, and one from the spell gem. This makes the party very powerful as the haste is twin and thus lets the paladin smite things to hell. So there's several things to look at here. First and foremost, if you cast the same spell on somebody twice, unless the spell description says otherwise, the benefits don't stack. So if I come along and I cast haste on somebody, and then the same round, for some strange reason, I can cast it again, or the next round or whatever, or somebody else casts haste on them, they only get the benefit of one haste spell. They don't stack. All right, so that's one thing to clear up there. So if you have, Anders, in your game, if you have somebody with a spell gem and they're, casting haste twice, which we're going to get into a little bit here in a second, that's actually not the way the rules work, but just for the sake of argument, if you could, they're not twice hasted. Okay, they're just once. They don't stack unless a spell says otherwise or an effect says otherwise. Okay, and also haste is a concentration spell. So if I cast haste on somebody and the very next round I cast haste on them again, that first haste drops and the second haste goes into effect. It's a concentration spell. And using a spell gem or a scroll or anything like that, I don't think negates the requirements of concentration. It's still a concentration spell. So, that's why I like Black Razor is so powerful, because the haste that Black Razor throws, Black Razor will maintain the concentration for that. You don't have to maintain it yourself. And it states that specifically for Black Razor. So that's just an example of something stating otherwise. The other thing is that's very important to know here, and this is why, understanding the fundamentals of D&D are important. So then if something doesn't outright state it, you still understand the principles of the rules and the mechanics, so that you can apply them. You can only, now, I'm not going to go into a full discussion on this. Okay, so if people want to, in the comments, list the different exceptions or whatever, I would welcome you to do so. But just for the purposes of this discussion, in general, you can only cast one regular spell each round or each turn. Okay? Now, maybe later in the round, as a reaction, you could cast something. But for the most part, you can only cast one regular, because most spells have a casting time of one action. Okay? And the key here on the spell gem is that, I'm sorry, I keep hitting that. I'm really trying to find a better setup from audio here. Now let's see here. It says, while holding the gem, and this is on page 223, you can cast the spell from it as an action if you know the spell, or if the spell is in your class's spell list. You cast the spell. Okay? It's not like Black Razor casting the spell for you. You cast the spell using the spell gem. And according to the magic rules in D&D, you can only, in general, now there's nuances here, but in general, you can only cast at most one standard spell, casting time of one action per turn. Now there's some little it's like, oh, well, you can cast a cantrip as a bonus action, and you can cast a spell. There's some variations here. But for the most part, the main rule is you can only cast one standard spell per turn. And since the verbiage of spell gem specifically says you cast it while holding the stone or the gem, you're limited. And plus, it's an action. It says as an action. So normally you cast a spell as an action. So how would you have another action to cast a spell, even if you were able to? So, and I don't, again, I'm not giving Anders a hard time, or anybody out there that would think this is how it works as a hard time, because, when you first read it, I could totally understand why you think you could do it that way. But that's not the intent of the spell gem, best I can tell. If somebody knows different, let me know. Um, but yeah, the players using the spell gem that way in your campaign, in my opinion, are doing it incorrectly. Now, assuming you agree with me, Anders, now as a DM, it's your prerogative to keep letting them do that if you want. It's your game. You can mix and match as you choose. But assuming that you go, oh yeah, we've been doing that wrong. How do I fix that? Because you mentioned something in there about what you ended up doing was that Kazook Pickshine disappeared from Blending Stone, so you cannot have any more spell gems. So you're like, I'm done. No more spell gems. Uh, and you're wondering if the Fair's Rest maybe should corrupt some or all of his spell gems so they don't work. What do others here in the comment section think about that? So Anders is asking for comments. And this particular question is on video 62. So, here's how I'd handle it. Because if this were my campaign at this point, I would be like, man, I've messed up, and this is way OP, and it's causing a problem. So out of game, and just out of character, I'd say, hey guys and gals, I messed up. I was either I didn't know enough to tell you it can't be done that way, or if if they asked you and you said, yeah, you can do that, you can come back and say, I messed up. I'm sorry. I misunderstood the rules, and that's not the way it works. So I'm not going to retcon all the previous uses of that, but from this point forward, you can no longer use spell gems that way. You can still cast spells out of them, but it would be just like casting any other spell. You're not going to cast haste twice or whatever in one turn. So remember, a turn is different from a round. Turn is your turn in the round. Like later in the round or earlier in the round, you could do a reaction maybe. And then you got bonus actions. But again, main rule is one standard spell per turn. So I would just say we're moving forward, we're not doing that. Now, if you wanted an in-game reason, you could say, due to the craziness of the demon lords and the weirdness of the Fair's Rest and all that, temporarily it was allowing that, kind of almost like a wild magic effect. But that has gone away, and now you can no longer do that. So you could do it that way if you want it. Or you could do like you said and said, oh, they're all corrupted now, and you can't use them anymore. So whatever. But thanks for the chance to clarify that, and but I definitely would not allow that behavior. And I don't mean behavior like, oh, they're, I'm just saying I wouldn't allow that game mechanic. I wouldn't allow 2 spells in 1 turn because of the spell gem. So, and then also last, Anders said, I see that maybe you have the same power creep on Black Razor. It's very powerful. We're about to run Dead and Thay, and they have Black Razor. I wonder if the one PC will be too powerful for the story. How do you feel about Black Razor? Does it make the party too powerful? Depends on the level of your party, Anders. And also, remember that there's an alignment restriction, so not just anybody can use Black Razor. And Black Razor also has a requirement to be fed souls. I think every 3 days, if he doesn't or it doesn't get fed souls, bad things can start happening, and that's kind of up to you as a DM is what happens. It just says in the Dungeon Master's Guide, something along the lines of to keep Black Razor happy and attuned to you and all that. I think you've got to every 3 days or you start getting negative consequences. Up to and including, like, Black Razor will eat its wielder's soul if it can, if it thinks it needs to. Because it's, at the end of the day, it just wants to eat souls. It doesn't care. It doesn't form like a friendly relationship with its wielder. Its wielder is a means to an end. And as long as that wielder is bringing it souls, everything's happy. And as soon as that stops, Black Razor is either like, feed me souls, or I'll find another wielder, or I'll eat you if possible, whatever. So just keep that in mind. And then also with what I've done with the 3 weapons from White Plume Mountain is because they were asleep so long, and also to help prevent game balance issues, they are slowly unlocking their powers as the players gain experience and also use the weapons more. So that kind of helps it keep from being too powerful. But yeah, full on Black Razor, full on powered up, no restrictions Black Razor can be pretty powerful. I mean, it's, in my opinion, these weapons are artifact level. I don't know why they're not artifacts. I guess I just don't understand enough about the math of the rule set why they're not artifacts. So there you go. So, all right. So that is it for viewer feedback. And if you thought that was, I mean, you're like, wow, that was a lot of, a lot of information. I mean, I answered a lot of questions that first time around in the recording that I lost. So, anyway, and you know, if for the, some people love your viewer feedback, some people don't. Uh, you know, all I can say is that what I always do in the video notes is I put a timestamp when viewer feedback ends and the main recap starts. So you can always use that to just jump past viewer feedback if you want. I would recommend you watch viewer feedback because it's not just me saying hello to people. I do a lot of rules clarifications. And a lot of times we talk about the Out of the Abyss adventure and go further and expand on things, just like we did with the spell gem. So anyway, up to you. I've had some feedback. Some people like it, some don't. There you go. But anyway, moving on, I'm going to take off my +3 spectacles at viewer feedback, and we will get going on what happened in the most recent session. Again, I apologize for this. I really tried to avoid that bright back there. Anyway, it is what it is. Okay, so real quick, due to the magic of being able to stop and start the video, there's what it looks like with all the lightsabers fired up. Like I said, I got a video on my channel if you want to go see more. Watch the whole process. And then also, here's the Captain Phasma mug my wife got me for Christmas. I dig it. I dig it very much. So, and if you've seen Star Wars The Last Jedi, you'll know that her armor is like finally some Stormtrooper armor that works. What do you know? I also want to say if you haven't seen Last Jedi, or if you have seen it, I've got a spoiler-free video a few videos back, first reaction, spoiler-free, where I just basically discussed what I thought about the movie. And, you know, I loved it. I thought it was amazing. I thought it was pretty complex storytelling that kind of subverted and confounded expectations and had some good character development for Star Wars, especially the new trilogy. So from a D&D perspective, from a storytelling perspective, I think that some of the character development and the almost fake outs, you know, subverting expectations and that sort of thing could be interesting type of storytelling to use in D&D. So anyway, all right. So at the end of last session, they were still in the troglodyte lair. They had just in area 8 had just finished fighting the ropers. And I mean, that's right. And the ropers are dead. Okay, we got to go. And we had to end the session, so that's where we're at. And again, remember this video, I'm going to recap 2 sessions in a row because I didn't feel like that the ending of the troglodyte had enough to justify its own video. In retrospect, it probably did, but oh well. Okay, so they ended in area 8. So you've got, you know, a couple of dead ropers, and there were supposed to be 4 piercers. I made that 8. And then you had a dead drow that had some loot on him. So let's go to area 8 and take a look at that. Okay, yeah, so searching the cave reveals the remains of a half-eaten male drow laying against one wall. Drow carries a small pouch containing 30 gold pieces and 2 spell scrolls of shield and phantasmal force written on sheets of trillimac, which is a fungi. It's kind of used for paper in the Underdark. I gave the players the 30 gold pieces, but I had the 2 spell scrolls be kind of moldy or messed up or whatever beyond use. Maybe the ropers tore them up or whatever. Because, I mean, these players, this group they're already basically a Christmas tree group with their magic items. And if you're not familiar with that term, it's basically a style of play in D&D or other role-playing games where the magic items or whatever are like almost expected and constant, like presents under a Christmas tree. So they've gotten a bunch. It's not quite Christmas tree, but it's getting close. And it's caught me off guard a few times how they've used those magic items. So I'm kind of backing off a little bit on the magic items. Now, if the ropers are killed and cut open, the adventurers find 25 platinum pieces, not bad, in the gizzard of one and a ring of protection in the gizzard of the other. Now, none of the players thought of that on their own. So what I had was Eldith, you know, she's a scout. and she's more familiar with the Underdark. I gave her a 50% chance. Said if she rolls under 50 on percentile dice, she'll say, hey, sometimes if you cut ropers open and check their gizzards, they've got stuff. And if she rolled above 50, she wouldn't. Well, I rolled like a 47. So she made that suggestion, and they did, and they found that treasure. So that's a neat way of, in my opinion, giving them a chance to find that if they wouldn't normally think about it. So it's not quite a gimme because they only have a 50% chance. But anyway, so and then because I said the scrolls were too damaged to use, so they leave there and they go immediately northwest into back into the main area. I guess you could almost call it Area 2, but it's the big main cavern area. And immediately to the south is Area 9, and to the west is Area 4. And it's 4 is this kind of basin with a dry ditch that leads into Area 9. And there's a stream that bisects the main cavern, and it flows into Area 9 and forms a small 10-foot deep pool. And there's a crack in the bottom of Area 9, and water slowly is, draining out, I guess, because it says a small crack. So that's why the stream going into Area 9 isn't just completely, filling it up. And what's interesting is the players immediately started developing theories because of the description. Oh, another thing in Area 9, not only is the water safe to drink, but there's several water globes, or whatever you call those, a type of fungus that has water in it. So if like a gallon of water or something, 3d6 water orbs. So if the party is running low on water, with the rations or whatever, if you're really keeping up with that with the expedition or whatever, here's a good chance to get some water. But the party immediately began theorizing that maybe the troglodytes are fighting over water. Maybe the water source is drying up, or maybe a troglodyte fouled the water. Now these theories are wrong, but it's interesting to hear them thinking about it, because as a DM, but they don't know, and that's just as valid as any other theory at this point. So it's interesting to hear players kind of talk about that kind of thing. But in reality, they're fighting over the sword, basically. So what I did was I asked for some, I can't remember who, maybe gave one or two players a chance for this. So give me a DC 13 wisdom check. I just said give me a wisdom check, but it was going to be DC 13, and I think I just set that. I can't remember if the book does this or not. But it's, if they made it, then they would get a general sense of what the troglodytes were arguing over and about to fight over. And they made it. And so I said, well, you kind of, because they're like, is it the water? Is it this? They're obviously kind of studying the troglodytes, trying to find out what's going on. And remember, there's these two groups of troglodytes basically separated by the stream, and they're, obviously smack talking each other and working themselves up into the, the frenzy or rage or whatever to attack. And what's happening is that the chieftain has a +2 magical longsword. I think it's a drow make, if I remember right. And his rival wants that sword. That's what it's all about. And then they've taken the chieftain's mate captive, and she's tied up, I think in Area 3, as we described last video. So that's what the fight's all about. And so they made their, wisdom check or whatever. And, they got the sense that they're fighting over the sword. It's the sword. They don't know which group is who or anything like that, but the sword seems to be the point of contention. Now they don't understand why the captive is over there tied up, the mate, but they know that the sword's at the center of all this. So they got that point. Now they sent a couple of characters to kind of scout around. And in, it says in the book, I think, that while the troglodytes are not fighting, but they're just sort of, arguing and looking at each other. It's distracted enough. You can sneak around in this cavern if you stay close to the cavern walls with just a DC 10 stealth check, dexterity stealth check. So it's not too difficult. You got to, just on a D20, you've got a 50% chance basically. So if you have any bonuses, you're in decent shape. But they were able to check around, and they found kind of there's a little cavern that leads nowhere, and then they found the exit at 15, and then they found the rally point at area 14, which has 6 great giant lizards and 6 troglodytes in there waiting to come rushing out as cavalry once the main fight starts. I think the rival has set them up that way, if I remember right. So, the players, it was a couple of the players, I think like a monk and the rogue, were sneaking around, scoping everything out, and they found that area 14 with the 6 giant lizards and the 6 troglodytes. And, I'm thinking, because I put a lot of troglodytes in this room. I doubled, tripled, whatever. You saw the pictures last video where I took my whiteboard and I drew out the cavern, and I just took and I just speckled all over it, showing all these troglodytes. I did that on purpose because I didn't want this to just be some big combat slog. If I was going to do the troglodyte thing, just really the only reason I did it was for that roper encounter. So I guess I could have just had ropers and not have the troglodytes at all, but I had the troglodytes because it presented an interesting story development, an interesting thought. We got all these troglodytes down there. Do we fight them? Do we go around them? What do we do? And remember, one of my players last time was like wanting to instigate stuff so that the troglodytes would start fighting each other and all this stuff, or maybe even let's just, it's like if that goes wrong, you might have to fight all the troglodytes. He's like, bring them on. And, I was very frank with everybody, even though my name is Shane. For a moment, I was frank with everybody, or a couple of people after the session. And I think I even said, once we wrapped up the troglodytes, I said straight out, if you guys had fought all these troglodytes, you probably would have beat them all, or at least survived a retreat action. But it's very possible one or more of the party could have just straight out died, because this is a lot of troglodytes. Like I said, I purposefully double, tripled, whatever, the amount of troglodytes that were in the cavern. And remember, even a kobolds can be dangerous in groups. They start using group tactics and all this stuff. In fact, if you want to humble an arrogant party, hit them with a bunch of kobolds. Because any creature in a huge, large group, I'm not talking about a swarm that acts as one creature. I'm talking about a lot of the same type of creature, especially if they're going to use any kind of intelligent tactics, can mess people up. Now, this party does have that rod of rulership, which they could have tried to use. But even then, I would not have just had one roll for every troglodyte. There would be a very good chance some troglodytes would have fallen under its spell, others wouldn't, et cetera, et cetera. So, at this level of the characters, as many people have pointed out, this troglodyte is not that threatening of an encounter. So I just wanted to make it more interesting than it was just a battle. So I'm thinking with all these troglodytes that the players are just going to find the exit and beat feet as soon as possible. Like I made it really clear even when they found the exit at 15. I was like, this looks like the exit. But then they wanted to keep searching and they found area 14. And players being players, they're like, shiny. They saw the 6 giant lizards and they're like, we want those giant lizards. And I'm like, oh, and I didn't even see that coming. I figured they just want to get out of there because there's so many troglodytes. But these are players. They will do the things you're talking about, subverting expectations and confounding expectations. They will do the thing that you don't expect. So they ended up, I think, stealthing back to get the main party members. And then they all stealth back over to area 14. So there's all these stealth rolls happening. And, we did a group stealth roll on the way back. That's where everybody rolls and you have to have at least half or more get it or everybody fails. But they all made it back. That the DC 10 is not too terrible of a stealth roll. And so they're at the cave. And so then they're like, okay, if we put silence over the mouth or in front of the mouth of the cave, will that block sounds coming out of it? And the answer is yes. I looked that up page 276 in the player's handbook for silence. It sounds cannot pass through the silence spell, the area of effect of the silence spell. So they threw silence on the cave mouth or whatever, the entrance to that area, and then they went in and started slaughtering troglodytes basically, and I think they got them all within like a round or two, and the only thing that was really dangerous about that, with their spell level or their level facing troglodytes, the 6 troglodytes and the giant lizards were not that much of a challenge. What the danger of it was not every player went into the cave. So you had a couple players hanging out outside of the cave, and at least one of them was casting like magic missile or something into the cave from outside of it. And then there's flashes and craziness happening inside the cave because of spells and whatnot. So, you've got a chance for the troglodytes that are out there yeah-yaing each other to suddenly notice, hey, what's going on over there? So I gave the outside folks a chance to be seen, and it wasn't at DC 10, it was higher, or is it, a higher roll needed, because they weren't trying to be stealthy. They're sitting there fighting and looking into this cave, but yet somehow the rolls still allowed them to not be seen. So, wow. Okay. So they're like, oh, and once I said, hey, I'm rolling to see if they see you because you're still outside the cave, they scuttled on into the cave and da-da-da. And then I gave them an animal handling. I think I just made it a DC 10 maybe I read that in the book, or maybe I just pulled it out. I don't know. Maybe I went and looked at the giant lizards in the book. But they just needed a DC 10 for animal handling, and they rolled, their stealths and their animal handling through this whole scene, except for one exception, they were just killing it. So boom, boom, boom. The giant lizards we're good. And in fact, the cleric who had lost her giant lizard to Viseron, the arrogant drow archmage, he just like, I'm taking this lizard, and she was all upset about it. She rolled a natural 20 on her animal handling. Now, again, a natural 20 doesn't necessarily apply to a skill check, but in this case, I thought it would be fun to say that lizard loves you. That lizard is making big moon lovey eyes at you. That lizard is your lizard. And she got a kick out of that, especially since she lost her other lizard. And I think she named the lizard Kitty or something, because she's got this thing about cats. It's kind of an ongoing joke that she'll even make. So anyway, so that was kind of a fun little moment, unexpected moment. But yeah, so they got all the lizards. They got, okay, let's get out of here. So they're getting the lizards, and they're going to head out the exit 15. Well, they have to send somebody to stealth back over to the expedition, and then get the expedition and stealth back over to the cave exit. So while all this is going on, what I determined is I gave the troglodytes a cumulative chance to start just fighting. And I set it at 30%, then 40%, then 50%, and just kept going up and up. Now, the book, I'm pretty sure, just says that they will eventually fight. There's some time thing. Resolving the standoff. 20 minutes after the characters arrive at Area 1, this is on page 171, the fight will begin, and there's a whole series of steps that happen. And it'll last, it says if the adventurers don't intervene, the battle lasts approximately 20 rounds. The chieftain is killed. And you can even, while the battle's underway, a character can sneak through an area occupied by troglodytes with a successful DC 10 dexterity stealth check. So anyway, but now one thing it does say, it says as tense as the standoff between Hislot and Sislar is, I think Hislot is, let's see. Yeah, I think Hislot is the rival and Sislar is the, well, let's see if I got this right. Yeah, I'm pretty sure Sislar is the chieftain. And the cavalry, those lizards are evidently Sislar's cavalry. It says Sislar's cavalry in Area 14 makes its way through the western side caves and attacks Sislat's forces behind. So that's one of the things that happens. So, but they will. The troglodytes quickly forget their conflict and unite against common threats, such as the characters in their unwelcome expeditionary force. So, there you go. If they're seen, even if the fight's going on, if they see them, they're like, then they'll all unite and go after the characters in their expedition. So, what ended up happening, I think, when it was at 40% chance, I think I actually rolled that. And so my second check to see if they would start fighting, they did. And this is during they're trying to get out now. They've gotten the lizards and they're trying to leave and all that. So the fighting starts. Somehow I had 3 stealth rolls at this point because the people on the lizards had to get to the exit. And then the party member going over to the expedition to get them and bring them back to the exit had to make a stealth roll. And then the expedition's all heading for the exit, up against the cavern wall. They had to make a stealth roll. And the expedition failed its stealth roll. The party made it. The main adventurers on lizards made theirs. The rogue or whatever going back over to get the expedition made his. But the expedition as a whole, and I can't remember how I handled it. I'm sure I didn't roll for every expedition member. I probably just set some kind of DC and just rolled and gave it some kind of modifier. They failed. So, and all 3 had to succeed not to be noticed. So what happened was, player characters are at the exit. The PC goes back over and gets the expedition and they're heading to the exit and they're just about to the exit. And a couple of, they notice that the dynamic of the noise and the activity in the main chamber is changing. And it becomes apparent that more and more troglodytes have seen them and are seeing them and are trying to get the attention of all the other troglodytes. Look, we have invaders. And then eventually, all the troglodytes are like, whoa. And then, the 2 rivals leave their differences behind momentarily. And it becomes this big bum rush, towards the player characters of all these troglodytes, which again could be a pretty dangerous threat, even at this character level. So, I said, you have 1 round while they're all, reacting and running towards you. What are you going to do? And I did that on purpose. Like, let's give this a sense of urgency. What are you going to do? And they ended up doing pretty smart. They ran into the exit, and then the warlock cast Hunger of Heydar right at the exit mouth, entrance to the exit, if you will. And Hunger of Heydar is a warlock spell that it has like an area of darkness and it does cold damage. And there's like tentacles in there and whispering nasty sounds, and it will do all kinds of different damage to you if you're in there. And I ruled that was enough of a deterrent to the, troglodytes. Whoa, and maybe 1 or 2 of them ran in there and horrible things happened, but the troglodytes as a whole group kind of stopped. And then they that gave, until the spell faded or whatever, that gave the main group time to go and get out ahead enough of the troglodytes to avoid a chase scene. So that's where that session ended. And we picked up immediately on the next session with being right there, like they've just eluded the troglodytes. They're just far out enough ahead that they know that they're not being chased. But at this point, they haven't had a short rest. They haven't had a long rest. Any hit points, they're down. Any abilities that they've used that need to renew are down. Any, hit dice they've spent or whatever. It's all, they're in the same status. And I did that on purpose for 2 or 3 sessions in a row to give them a feeling of, we're really adventuring here and this can be kind of tough and we can use ourselves up doing that. So they haven't even had a long rest. They're just catching their breath, kind of talking about what do we do next? And kind of talking about, wow, that could have been pretty dangerous. Even though that one player was like, I want to instigate stuff. And Eldith notices at that point that they've got a message from Ascending Stone. So she brings it over to, and we, I asked the party, I said, who basically from the party is reading and responding to the Ascending Stones from Gontalgrim and the other outposts and whatnot. And they all kind of it came down to the player that has the bard. One, because the bard is a good spokesperson, being a bard, very persuasive and etc. And then two, because the player that plays the bard has a lot of experience in role playing games in D&D. So just for all these, and is older than the players. So just for all these reasons, that player character is the spokesperson. I don't know if I've mentioned that before. I think it's pretty important for a party to maybe not necessarily a leader, although some D&D parties that can benefit, like, okay, what are the ideas out there, but one person will make the decision. But anyway, this is just more of a spokesperson. They got the message from Eldith, and this was really fun for me as a DM. I'll explain why I did this here in a second. But so they basically got a message from the Sending Stone. I'm going to put on my +3 glasses of Sending Stone reading here real quick. And it says, diplomatic crisis with Menzo Baranzan. Stability of Underdark at peril beyond demon lords. Moon Elf Elif required at Gauntlgrim when possible. Bruiner personally sending this. So that's a pretty big deal for Bruiner Battlehammer, the king, to personally be sending basically an email or a text message or a telegram or whatever to the party. And so what was interesting to me when I handed, because I literally had it on I wrote it down on an index card, handed it over to the player, and said, "You get this message," and they read it and they were like, and set it down. Now, what I would have expected, and again, it's fascinating to me to see the different ways that players behave versus my expectations. I expected, and I go, well, okay, so here's what it says. But instead he was like, oh, we got problems. We're going to have to get back to Gauntlgrim. And when pressed by the other players a little bit, and I think Eldith even was like, do you want to tell them more than that or whatever, shared a little bit more and said, basically the Moon Elf, Elif, is needed back at Gauntlgrim, and it appears to have to do with trouble with the drow. So at this point, I don't know if you remember or not, but a few episodes back when they were in Mantle Dareth, the Moon Elf Warlock character, when they had the Demon Lord that was in the gym in Mantle Dareth, and anybody who touched that gym had to make a saving throw or get indefinite madness. At one point, when the Zentarum and the drow and the player characters are all around discussing this gem, the player character just reached over and purposefully touched the drow, the lead drow that represented the drow faction and negotiated on behalf of the drow faction at Mantle Dareth. And it was an immediate major offense. And also that drow did contract indefinite madness. The players don't know that, but I know that. So not only was it a deep offense, but that drow came under a madness, an indefinite madness. So it was a big deal at the time, and it still is a big deal. So I purposefully kind of let it bide for a while, and then I'm like, I want to bring it back up. And there's a couple of reasons I'm doing this as a DM. One, I think it's interesting storytelling to take an action by the player and expand on it and turn it into what could possibly even be a major secondary plot point in this adventure that wasn't intended. Two, I'm trying to find a way in game to address that player character's behavior without trying to give the player themselves a hard time. Because the tone of Out of the Abyss, the adventure itself, the gravity of what's going on and the seriousness of what the players have been asked to do doesn't really lend itself to like a moment. It's like a Mel Brooks moment or something. And so I'm trying to find a way to address that isn't like, how dare you do that in my campaign, but instead is just a fun way of making the point that if you do reckless, crazy stuff like that in character, it may have crazy repercussions. Now, this is one of the same players that did crazy stuff in White Plume Mountain that kind of attempted to address in game in White Plume Mountain, like, hey, you might want to take this a little bit more seriously. But in White Plume Mountain, it didn't bother me as much because that's kind of a fun house dungeon, so it's kind of crazy to begin with. So if the player wants to act that way, yeah, it's kind of weird, but it's not like they're trying to save the world. But in this case, they're really kind of trying to save the world. If the demon lords will, after they lay waste to the Underdark, the surface and the prime material plane itself could be in danger. It's definitely in danger, at least the surface world. So it's a so, and this is a drow. This is a representative of a drow from Menzo. So they're a representative of Menzo Bronzin at Mantled Aerith, and they're also, they have a whole house behind them. The drow have houses. Of all kinds of drow, the family is very important. The house is very important to a drow. So when it became clear that there was a diplomatic issue, the player was like, but I thought, and then they kind of stopped. And I assume what they would have said was like, well, I thought that was just a personal thing with me and the drow. And I'm not working technically for King Bruenor. I'm assuming that's what they were going to say, but they were just like, oh, and they sat back and thought about it. So if you'll remember, the drow basically swore vengeance personally of her and her house on the Moon Elf Warlock when that was done. Right then. But during negotiations on whether do we smash the gem or what do we do with the gem, the Warlock very shrewdly, in my opinion, negotiated for that vengeance to wait a year to begin. Assuming like, well, we'll be out of the Underdark by that point, and it'll be harder for the drow to get to me. Not impossible, but harder, and I can get back to my guild and all that. So that was a pretty shrewd move. And the drow agreed to that. They said, the anticipation will make the vengeance even better, even sweeter. But unbeknownst to the player character and the other players, there's a diplomatic issue here too. And you better believe that the drow at Menzo Bronzin are going to take advantage of that to apply negative pressure on Gauntlgrim. There's politics in the Underdark. And even though technically the players are not direct agents of King Bruenor or Gauntlgrim, it's no big secret that they were brought back under. I mean, even the Zentarum know that the player characters were requested to come back to Gauntlgrim by King Bruenor, and then all these other factions got involved, and the expedition went into the Underdark. So yeah, you may not be able to technically prove that they work for King Bruenor, but the circumstantial evidence is really strong. The drow aren't stupid. And just like in real life, real politics, sometimes accusations are made, and if they can't be outright refuted or whatever, or even if they can be outright refuted, it's still all hanging in the air. And so, the drow don't want Gauntlgrim in the Underdark in the first place. Gauntlgrim is a relatively recently reclaimed dwarven stronghold. As far as the drow and a lot of other people in the Underdark are concerned, there's all these surface dwarves down invading the Underdark now. So that's a change. We don't like that. And most drow and Underdark races, not only do drow look down on every other race, but they definitely don't want a bunch of surface dwellers running around in the Underdark and having a foothold in the Underdark. So, they're definitely using this to apply very nasty diplomatic pressure on King Bruenor. And Eldith even, kind of said as much, after everything was said, after the message was, for the most part, received. And, she kind of took the player characters aside and explained to them all of basically what I just said. It's like, yeah, technically, you're not working directly for King Bruenor, but nobody down here is an idiot. And, people can put two and two together and figure out that you're basically working. I mean, and, hopefully they're not, scrying on our sending stones and stuff. I mean, it could be shown. And this could put King Bruenor and Gauntlgrim in a difficult position because he's supposed to maintain, hands off on this stuff, to a certain extent. And that was how it was proposed to be. That's why all these other factions the player characters themselves had to go to the factions and get their buy-in for support for the expedition and all that. But a good diplomat, or a bad diplomat, however you want to look at it, can use words and accusations and half-truths and just leave stuff hanging in the air and cause a real problem. So, and the drow, madness is spreading in Menzoberranzan too. So say the drow would normally not do this. Well, maybe the madness is part of this. Them coming at them really hard diplomatically. So, King Bruenor is kind of in a little bit of a pickle. Because that was a major offense that was done. And if I can be tied directly to him, who knows what would happen. Honor he may have to do things to satisfy honor. If they can be proven, because they can make the case that King Bruenor himself did that because they were agents of King Bruenor. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. But that's why it's so serious. And I did that to point out that your in-game actions, especially something like that, can have repercussions. And I hope it's a fun storytelling way to make that point, because I don't want to, players can do whatever they want. Now, I would rather it fit into the tone of the adventure and the party members and all that, but they can do whatever they want. But I, as a DM, have the ability and the right, really, to also respond with consequences. So we'll see where all this goes. And I'm not going to say, you'll have to stick with it to see how this all turns out. And they were, they also talked, because the bard was like, we got to go back to Gauntlgrim right now. And Eldith kind of like helped interpret the message, because the message said, when possible. And King Bruenor knows they're off deep in the Underdark, having an adventure, basically, a very serious mission. And they may not be able to just stop everything and go back to Gauntlgrim right then. So she kind of helped interpret, like, people understand how things work in the Underdark. What he's saying is, at the first feasible opportunity, at least the Moon Elf needs to return to Gauntlgrim. But, I would not advise that we turn around right now, and because we're right in the middle of the Wormwrithings. So let's, I guess they could teleport back to the Tower of Vengeance, but then they've got quite a journey back to Gauntlgrim anyway. So they're actually technically closer to Gauntlgrim in the Wormwrithings than they are if they teleport back to the Tower of Vengeance with that special, extremely limited use wand of limited Underdark teleportation that I made up for Vizeran to give them. So anyway, so what they sent back was, they said, urgency understood, will be there when feasible, as soon as possible. And one of the players, I can't remember which one, said, we should send back and tell them that it was actually the Archmage of Menzoberranzan who's responsible for the Demon Lords. And everyone's like, no, don't tell them that. And as the DM, I didn't say this to the players, but as the DM, I was like, that'd be a great idea, because then that would give King Bruenor some diplomatic ammunition to help keep help keep the Drow at bay. Oh, you're hearing that I did that to one of my agents? Well, that's not my agent, so I have no responsibility of that. But I'm also hearing that all of this problem started in Menzoberranzan with your Archmage. So that would have been actually some really good diplomatic advantage for King Bruenor. But, I let the players determine that. They were like, no, we don't want to do that. I'm like, okay. I didn't even hint around. I just sat back and let them figure it out. Okay, so at this point, what I had happen, again, I'm trying to keep this kind of urgent, moving things forward. We haven't really gotten a breather yet, kind of dynamic, which I wasn't going to let go too long, but I wanted to do it 2 or 3 sessions just to, give them that sense of, we may not always want to use up all our abilities and spells. We may want to kind of ration them out, because I think Morris from Ian World, somebody described this as like a Nova party. Maybe Merrick Blackman. I can't remember who described it like this, but it's a Nova party where they supernova, like Johnny Storm doing his Nova ability, the Human Torch, and then after that they're wiped out. They blast everything off immediately, and after that they got nothing left. That's usually their style of play. So I was just, a little bit kind of, helping them to know that, you might want to ration out your abilities just in case. Um, Now I'm sure if they fought all the troglodytes that they would have had to use everything to survive. But anyway, okay. So what had to happen was there's an encounter that happens after the troglodytes called Voice in the Dark, and that starts on page 171. This is a very important encounter. It's not one you want to skip over. Like troglodytes, literally, you could just skip over the troglodytes and you're fine. But Voice in the Dark, you want to do. And what happens is the players come on the remnants of a rockfall have opened up a small vaulted cavern along the passageway. Apart from the occasional glowing insects scuttling along the walls, the cavern is dark. Suddenly a loud voice booms out all around you in Undercommon. Turn back or suffer a death so horrible you cannot imagine. You have been warned. And this is actually a young drow using minor illusion to try to scare them away, because she's by herself and has been separated from her group, and she's very scared. But what I did to tie, instead of just they come across a rock fall, to add to the sense of, craziness or in this worm nursery, Wormwrithings area, I did another random encounter with a purple worm, and in front of them, I think, or maybe off to the side, something, I had another purple worm kind of burrow through near the expedition and open up this rock fall to open up this vaulted cavern, so that, there's a little bit of a rock fall, there's an opening and all that. And so a purple worm opens this up right in front of them or near them. And I also had 2 NPC expedition members get eaten on the spot. Purple worm came, wasn't even trying to eat them. It just burrowed them. They were like stone. It just sucked them up as it went along. And they're like, ah. So, one, I did that to remind them of the danger of these purple worms in this area they're in. And the Underdark in and of itself is very dangerous, but also to keep thinning out the NPC expedition, because I don't want to keep keeping up with all those NPCs. I think it's a neat idea, and at times a fun storytelling thing, and they've had fun with expedition management, but for the most part, I don't want to keep keeping up with all these NPCs. Plus, the party's pretty handy on its own, and every now and then, when they're in a fight, they're like, well, should we include the NPCs? And I'm like, you can. Remember, they'll want a share of the loot, and they'll get some of the XP, but I'm like, but you can. But I think, the party's handling itself really, really, really well, so I'm not absolutely sure that this expedition is needed, other than for flavor of this traveling expedition thing. But yeah, so, you got like the old jungle movies, and you got, the guides and all these people carrying stuff, and then, some raging something comes out of the jungle and carries 1 or 2 of them away. That's kind of what happened with this purple worm. But anyway, so it opens up this cavern for Voice in the Dark. Long story short, there is a young drow, and it never quite says her age. It just says young drow, and I kind of said it was kind of like a teenager or very young adult, 18, 19 or whatever, in drow years, whatever that calculation is, 30, 40, however many years that is. And then I know you can convert that stuff for elves, but she's basically a teenager, very young adult, and she's very scared. She's been separated from her mother, Zora Hallen, and her name is Hane Hallen, a young drow allied with House Mizram. And her mother, Zora Hallen, leads the Dark Hunters, which are drow explorers who steal purple worm eggs. These eggs are prized by wizards who use them in various arcane rituals. Hane was on her first egg run with her mother's team when a passing purple worm burst in the tunnel they were traveling through, separating her from the rest of the group. So she's in this little cavern that, another purple worm went through and opened up a little entrance into, and she's like, trying to scare away the expedition. So, and I think with a DC 15, perception check, wisdom perception check, she can be found because she's kind of hiding in the rubble. So basically what happened at this point, like the party was like looking in, couldn't see her. And like if they tried to go in, the voice would boom. If they backed out, the voice would stop booming. And they were almost like, is this, because they ran into that crazy mind flayer, the megalomaniacal mind flayer, Hermasticles, the all-crushing, a few sessions back, and they're like, is this another mind flayer like that, or maybe the same one somehow, even though we thought we killed him? So they didn't know what to think, but they were looking in there, couldn't see anything. And they decided at this point, they said, we're just going to take a short rest. So they took a short rest because they realized that if they weren't going into the cavern, nothing seemed to be happening. They took a short rest. And during that time, the rogue went creeping around in the cavern, looking around, but it never actually said, I'm investigating or perceiving. I just kind of want to look around in there. And he saw like an exit, and he saw kind of an idea of how big the cavern was, but he saw a way out of it, another worm tunnel and all that. But never actually said, I'm searching, right? If they were searching, I would have given them a perception check to see her. And I can't remember, maybe I dropped the ball on passive perception. I don't remember what his is, but it's possible passive perception would have revealed her. But for whatever reason, everyone took a short rest but him. And after the short rest, they kind of said, okay, we need to, because the way in front of us is like a smooth worm tunnel. And this little cavern that's opened up, like we know that the worm nursery is not in a smooth worm tunnel. It's more of like a natural cavern. So let's go that way. And so they went that way. And long story short, they spotted the young drow, Hana. And, they interacted with her. She's very, hungry and almost like feral wild child kind of thing. Stay away from me. Trying I said the impression you get is almost like when a kitten or a young cat arches up, trying to look bigger than it really is. And eventually somebody offered her food. And that, it says right in the book that'll kind of, chill things out. They offered her food. They started talking with her in Undercommon and Elvish. Even though there's elves in the party, and like none of the people in her party are like her, or in the party are like her people. And drow are very about non-drow. At this point, she's hungry, she's scared. They're offering her food. They're saying, you'll be safe with us. Well, come with us. And she kind of told them the story. I'm with the Dark Hunters. I was on my first egg run, and and they're like, oh, we're going to the Worm Nursery too. Do you know how to get there? She goes, basically I just know that, we're close, and it's not in a smooth worm tunnel. It's in an area more like this. And so they ended up leaving through, they didn't go back the way they were. There was another exit out of this cavern they got into, and they went that way. And they probably said, you'll be safe. Now, here's why this drow is important. You don't have to be friendly with her. The party can kill her for all they want to do. But if you are friendly with her and kind to her, in the Worm Nursery, you will encounter the Dark Hunters. And if you've been kind to Hana, then that will help relations with those drow. And also, if you establish good relations with those drow in the Worm Nursery, it can help the party later when they're in Menzoberranzan. So just keep that in mind. This is a pretty important encounter, not just for the Worm Nursery, but possibly later in the adventure. So let's see here. And then finally, they did make it to the Worm Nursery. And the way the Worm Nursery happens, they're traveling along. This starts on page 172, and everything around begins to shake and rumble, and the tunnel floor gives away beneath their feet. So basically, another tunneling purple worm underneath them made the floor unstable, and they fall through, and they fall into possibly. There's a map for the Worm Nursery on page 173. They fall into Area 1. And it says the burrowing of a nearby purple worm weakens the tunnel floor, causing a 10-foot section of it to break apart and collapse. Any character in the area must make a successful DC 15 dexterity saving throw or fall 25 feet into Area 1 below. Now, what I did just for efficiency's sake, I just said, the way it's happened, it's falling away underneath where the party is. The other expedition members are further enough up front or further enough behind you that they don't have to worry about it. I just kind of ad-libbed that. So the party all made their checks. One or two people failed, but I think one of the people that failed could throw Featherfall as a reaction. And so evidently the Featherfall was good enough for both characters to just kind of float down, and they were fine. So they hit Area 1. the worm nursery. And, they're like, what do we do? Because when they left the cavern area, they ended up back into another smooth worm tunnel. But yet here's this opening into more of a natural cavern looking thing. And so they're like, well, let's check this out because, we're looking for more of a natural cavern area. And we know that we're close to the worm nursery. You got to get them there sooner or later. So if they don't explore as soon as that happens, you got to find a way to get them back there. If they leave, maybe, have that happen again, or just give them an opening and boom, they find the worm. Somehow they got to get the worm nursery. But anyway, here's some characteristics of the worm nursery. All tunnels and chambers are dark unless the text states otherwise. The tunnels, and you'll see this on the map, tunnels marked T1, T2, and T3 on the map do not exist when the characters first enter the nursery. They are created by purple worms after the party arrives, as noted here. And then there's, in this sidebar on page 172, it tells you when these tunnels get opened up by worms in the worm nursery. And the first one is supposed to happen 15 minutes after the characters enter the worm nursery. I changed that up, and I'll explain why here in a little bit. Visiting worms are heralded by a low rumbling sound 2 minutes before they appear. The bats in Area 9 also swarm and flew their roost 1 minute before a purple worm appears. Purple worms ignore intruders except those in Areas 5 or 8, but they won't pursue anyone fleeing from those areas. So they'll defend the nursery, but they won't necessarily chase people down once they've gotten them out. So basically, what happens is tunnel T1 is not open yet. So when they first get into the worm nursery, really the only areas they can explore are 1, 2, 3, and 4. And it seems to be kind of an enclosed area. But at some point, if you go by the book, 15 minutes, by me it was later, and I'll explain why, that'll open up and then they can get into area 8. So anyway, the expedition decided to, okay, let's go down. So, they dropped ropes or whatever it was they needed to do, and everybody went down into area 1. And while they were kind of, securing the area 1, the rogue went exploring, and he went into in area 2, which is a fungus cave. And every 10 minutes spent foraging here yields 1d3 pounds of edible fungi per forager, up to a maximum of 30 pounds. So if you need to replenish rations or whatever for your expedition, you can do that there. My expedition's been in pretty decent shape. I think every now and then they're finding water or something like that, but food-wise, between foraging and all that, they've been in fairly decent shape. Now going from area 2 up to area 3, it says the passage to area 3 is a steep slope leading 10 feet upward and covered in small rocks and gravel. Moving up the slope requires a successful DC 12 dexterity acrobatics check. On a failed check, a character slips and tumbles down to the bottom of the slope, taking no damage. If someone at the top of the slope lowers a rope to help other characters climb, no check is necessary. So going from 2 to 3 is like a 10-foot. It's a steep slope leading 10 feet upwards, and it's got all these little small rocks and gravel, so it's easy to slip, but you won't get hurt. So it's just kind of more of an interesting narrative moment, or just for it's kind of slippery here, but it, unless you make it more dangerous, it's not really a big obstacle. Now, area 3 is this 30-foot chamber is dimly lit by luminescent lichen. Remember, almost the area is dark unless otherwise stated. Here's the interesting thing. Thousands of bones carpet the cavern floor, including many recognizable as humanoid, primarily dwarf, elf, and goblin, and some belonging to strange and unidentifiable creatures. Now, pay attention to this. Exactly where the bones came from is a mystery. And then there's a crack in the south wall leads to area 4. Now, this is the area in 3 where tunnel 1 will open up because of a purple worm, but it's not open right now unless you say they've been there 15 minutes or longer and you go by the book that it opens up in 15 minutes. So they won't be able to get to area 8 until that tunnel's made. Now, these thousands of bones carpeting the cavern floor drove my rogue player nuts. It was like searching, looking. investigating, I mean, rolling well, and I'm like, all you're seeing is that there are thousands of bones lining the floor because the book just says exactly where the bones came from is a mystery. I don't know. As a DM, I could improvise something, but sometimes I think it's fun for just stuff to just be there and not necessarily have an explanation. But yeah, it's driving my role player nuts. So I mean, he just really spent a lot of time on this room because he's convinced, something's up. And then if you go to Area 4, it makes it even worse because when you go down to that chasm south of Area 3, this 30-foot high unlit cavern has a 20-foot wide pit at its center, which descends 1,000 feet. So not only in the very next area do you have all these bones, thousands of bones, you can't figure out how you got there. Immediately south of that is a 20-foot pit that goes down 1,000 feet. They don't even know how, by the time the party got there and investigated it, they have no idea how deep it is. Like you could drop a rock in there, you're probably not gonna hear it 1,000 feet down, unless you got amazing ears. I guess you could send a familiar down there. You could send, like one of those spells that lets you send an eyeball and look through it or something like that. But basically, it's just practically a bottomless pit from their perspective. Now, 30 feet down is a small ledge holding the skeletal remains of a moon elf adventurer clad in moldering leather armor. Now, if you want to scale the chasm walls without gear, it requires a successful DC 15 strength athletics check. If you fall, unless something intervenes, you're falling like almost 1,000 feet. You're probably going to die. And the treasure here is the skeleton still wears a ring of free action on one bony finger. And the party, between like dancing lights and other stuff, they just did that, and then somebody mage handed. I think the warlock mage handed, and just boop. They got, I read the description on mage hand. It seems like it could, pick up a ring, and they got the ring. I just let them do that. They didn't climb down there. Once they realize that it's basically a skeleton with moldy armor, molding leather armor, and the only thing of interest seems to be the ring of free action, or the ring, which they got. I'm not even sure if they know what it is yet. I think they identified it because after that, they decided to reinforce Area 1. They sent some sentries back up to where that cave-in happened to be up there to keep an eye out. And then they sent some sentries at where, when you go from 1 to where the area splits into 2 and 3, and they put some sentries right there at that split. And so they were being cautious because they're like, man, there's all these bones in there. What's going on? Da da da. But they took a long rest. And now the rogue, when it did take a long rest, but the player was just like, what, man? And, just thinking, these bones, that pit. Went a couple of times to check things out again, and just was really obsessed with it, which was interesting to me. But I knew nothing was going to happen. I let them have their long rest with no problems, because it doesn't state anything comes out of the pit. It doesn't state anything weird happens with the bones. As DM, you can do that if you want. But anyway, I don't even think it's the pit going down. I don't even think is a purple worm tunnel, because it's there's that ledge there. Like a purple worm's not, it's just going to leave a smooth tunnel, not even a ledge. So anyway, they took their long rest. And then after that, they got their long rest. It was successful. And at the end of the long rest, where we ended things was, I said that, and the reason I waited for tunnel T1 to open up is because they stated they wanted to have a long rest. So I was like, okay, I didn't want it to open up until, I wanted them to get their long rest. It was fine. So they finished their long rest, and right at the end of that, there's that kind of rumbling and all that of a purple worm. And then I told them that the acoustics coming from the east seem to be a little bit different now. There's kind of a noise, and things are it just seems a little different. The atmosphere of the cave feels a little different, and that's because that's open now. So when they go investigate, which I assume they will, they can get into Area 8. So we did that, and the rogue is still obsessing about the bones in the pit. Poor guy. I'll probably, out of character, let the guy, let the player off the hook if he just keeps obsessing over it. So a couple other things that we did. Remember that lizard mounts, at least I think the way we're playing them, and maybe it's a variant in the monster manual, they do have spider climb. So we discussed that. I kind of reminded the party or the players, that the worm tunnels go all directions. They're not just this flat traveling. They're not just flat. So they might be going up at an angle. They might be going down at an angle. There might be times where they're using ropes and stuff to go straight up or straight down. So, kind of, you maybe rewind your party of that. Also for Christmas, I gave all of my players 500 XP. They all got that for Christmas. Just take 500 XP. So they seemed to like that. So I think that's it. Let me look over my notes and see if there's anything else that I want to mention, but I'm pretty sure that is everything that I want to mention. So yes. Oh, yep, that's it. So thanks so much for watching. We will catch you next time on Shane Plays. I do hope that you would leave this video a comment and maybe a thumbs up. That helps me out tremendously. Maybe tell people about the channel. But regardless, thanks for watching, and we will catch you next time on Shane Plays.